Okay, so as the war in Ukraine continues to rage on, um, I don't want to talk about it every week. And so because it is Jews and the news, I'd like to talk about different subjects that are happening in the news. And so I thought, just because I'm not talking about the war in Ukraine doesn't mean I'm not thinking about it. We should all be thinking about it, doing all we can to support refugees, to support Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. So very important to keep it in mind. But there are other things that are happening in the news as well that I think are interesting to comment on. So one was that I want to talk about today is the funeral that took place in Israel yesterday for a Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, who was a leading religious authority in Israel, and he died at the age of 94. And a small crowd of 750,000 people attended his funeral. So it's unclear exactly how they attended, but there were eulogies. So the way the Times of Israel described it, the procession started at his home in Bnei Brak. So we have to understand a little bit of geography in Israel. My family and I made Aliyah back in 1972. The goal was to stay, but things happened in our family. It was only for a year. In 1972, there was one road that led south from Tel Aviv. That was the main highway. We were living in Ashkelon that year, further south along the coast, like a few miles further south of Ashkelon, you get to the Gaza Strip. Okay, so in the recent Gaza wars, missiles have been fired from Gaza that have landed in Ashkelon. Anyway, so from Ashkelon all the way to Tel Aviv, one highway. What I knew about Bnei Brak at the time was that when we would ever travel to Tel Aviv, and we would do this once a month because my brother, who's intellectually disabled, my older brother, was in a residential facility just north of Tel Aviv in Herzliya. So we would drive up this road once a month on a Sunday, or no, it wouldn't be on a Sunday because that's a work day. I don't remember what day of the week it was, doesn't matter. Once a month we'd go up to visit my brother, past Bnei Brak. How do you know you're in Bnei Brak? Back in 1972, the one and only, at the time, Coca-Cola bottling plant was right along the side of the highway in Bnei Brak. So that's what I knew about Bnei Brak back from 1972. Now, since then, so that was 50 years ago. Yes. So since then, they've built other highways south of Tel Aviv to offset traffic congestion and whatnot. So that road is no longer the main road from Ashkelon to Tel Aviv. You'd have to, if you want to find that Coca-Cola bottling plant today, you have to Google it to figure out how to get there. But back in the day, that was it. You know you're getting close to Tel Aviv when you pass that Coca-Cola bottling plant, because Bnei Brak is just south of Tel Aviv. Bnei Brak, though, is known for its haven for Ultra-Orthodox Jews. It is a main center of Ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel. That, and in Jerusalem, Mea She'arim, among the neighborhoods. There are other neighborhoods where there are Ultra-Orthodox, but Mea She'arim, just outside of the old city of Jerusalem, is one of those main centers of Ultra-Orthodoxy. So this funeral procession leads from his home in Bnei Brak to the cemetery. And with 750,000 people attending this, attending, how do you figure out who's going to actually be there at the cemetery to bury him? So I have no idea how that happened. And there were some people who broke down the barricades to try to get in there. Police cordoned off the highway, that very highway with the Coca-Cola bottling factory, the Route 4, as it's called today, was cordoned off to allow for the procession and these 750,000 people to be part of it. So what is notable, and I think important to discuss, is who are these ultra-Orthodox Jews? Why do they have such an important role in Israeli society today? And how do we make sense of them today? Why are they ultra-Orthodox? What is their what's their whole ideology? So when we talk about ultra-Orthodox, when you read about them, they're called ultra-Orthodox by the non-ultra-Orthodox. Okay, so within their own society, they don't call themselves ultra-Orthodox. They call themselves Haredi, Haredim. Okay, it's from the word which means to tremble, and it not out of fright or fear, but trembling out of a sense of being imbued with a very strong sense of spirituality. Okay, that's the trembling. So they are, the first time I think in the Bible that we come across that word in a form is how the children of Israel, the community of Israel, were encamped at Mount Sinai, trembling at the foot of the mountain as they were about to receive and experience the revelation of God. Okay, so that trembling of the people of Israel at Mount Sinai that term, Haredim, plural, Haredi is one, has that spiritual sense that they live their lives as if they're at Mount Sinai all the time. Okay, the Haredi community around the world is divided among Lithuanians, whom Rabbi Kanievsky was the leader. So there's Lithuanian Haredim. There are Hasidim, who might at first blush look like Lithuanians, but are very different in approach to Jewish practice. So you got Lithuanians, you got Hasidim, you have Nature Karta, you have Haredi, Sephardi Haredi, as opposed to the others, which are Ashkenazi Haredi. You have Sephardi Haredi, and then you have Baal Teshuvah, or New Hasidim. Okay, so, and then there's also the Jerusalem faction, apparently, according to the Jerusalem Post, and understanding the different factions of ultra-Orthodox. There's also Jerusalem faction and Edah Haredit, the Haredi sector. So I don't want to get into all of those. You can Google those on your own and find out all about it. But all those together comprise the Haredi community around the world. And in Israel, all of them together comprise 12% of Israel's population. Okay, so they are 12%. So out of 9 million or so people, it's close to 10 million people. Let's say it's 10 million people live in Israel, 12% of that. So that's 1.2 million. Is that right? Is that 12%? So 1% would be, no, that's 10. Yes, 10% is 10 million, is 1 million of 10. Yes. Okay. So, yeah, 1.2 million Haredi Jews in Israel out of about 7 million or so Jews of that 10 million, and the rest of them are Arabs mostly, and Druze and other. Okay. So 12% is not insignificant, but 12%. Let's just understand this a little bit. The way Israel's government functions is that it is a coalition, always a coalition government. So they don't have, there's no such thing as a two-party system in Israel, right? In England, it's mainly two-party, but there are other parties as well that usually go along with the two main ones to form a coalition with them. Most countries have 2 or 3 parties that you're choosing from. In Israel, you have like 20 or more that you're choosing from every time there's an election. And the other thing about the government of Israel and the Knesset that represents the population of Israel is that the map of Israel is not divided into districts. So in other words, where you live in Ashkelon, let's say, you don't vote for a representative for your district that will go to the Knesset to represent you. It doesn't work that way. Instead, the entirety of Israel is represented by whoever the entirety of Israel votes for. So you need to reach, as a political party, a particular threshold of votes. Let's say it's 3%. You have to get at least 3% of the voting population to vote for your political party, and then you get 1 seat in the Knesset. The more percentage of the vote you get, the more seats of the 120 seats in the Knesset you get. So the more political parties there are, the less likelihood there is of being a majority of one political party having 61 seats in the Knesset. So there has never been, even in the day when David Ben-Gurion was prime minister, even when how popular he was and the Labor Party was, he did not have 61 seats in the Knesset, his party. Okay, so there always had to be a coalition in order to reach that majority in order to form a government. Okay, the unlikely scenario that happened with Naftali Bennett being the prime minister of Israel this time was how, first, no ultra-Orthodox political party is in the government right now. And number 2, an Arab political party is in the government. So 2 things that had never happened before have happened in this current government. And the current government still exists because a major test for it was to pass a budget, and they managed to pass a budget, so they still are in control. So somehow the government is managing to function without an ultra-Orthodox party represented and with an Arab party in it. Okay, so all of that was to get to how, despite the fact that they only represent 12% of the population, there are several ultra-Orthodox political parties that have seats in the Knesset. Several, not one, several. Now, of course, there are several because Jews cannot agree on anything. So even though there are this 12% of Israel's population are Haredi, among the Haredi, the Lithuanians don't talk to the Hasidim. Among the Hasidim, there are Hasidic factions that do not talk to each other either, right? Like Lubavitch would never talk to Satmar, as an example of 2 Hasidic. They look, they're If they walk down the street, if a Lubavitch rabbi and a Satmar rabbi were walking down the street, you could not tell them apart. Okay, you have to know about the style of dress to know, oh, maybe one is wearing a particular buckle on their shoe, or the tzitzit is hanging out in a particular way, or their socks are a particular color, to know the difference between the variety of Hasidic sects there are. Okay, so I only know a few by name. There's the Gerer Hasidim, there are the Bobover, there's Lubavitch, there's Satmar. That's 4 that I know. Anyway, the list goes on and on. Okay, and among these, they don't talk to each other. And then the Sephardi Hasidim, Haredim, Sephardi Haredim, also have their own political party. That's, you may know the name if you're up on Israeli news, Aryeh Deri. He has been the leader of the Sephardi Haredi political party, and he was just indicted and I think went to jail. But he was always under threat of criminal prosecution for many, many years. Anyway, so you have the ultra-Orthodox themselves are not united at all. So now let's just talk about, do Haredi wear black hats? Yes, they do. And it all depends on the type of black hat to help determine which Haredi they are. Okay, so apparently Lithuanian Haredi wear a particular style of black hat. And I forget which article I read. It's a particular brand of black hat that a Lithuanian Haredi wear. They also wear a black suit and a black tie and a white shirt. So they wear a suit, not the longer kaftan, and a particular kind of black hat. So I couldn't tell you. It's a kind of fedora, but I don't know which brand of fedora it is. So, there's a particular, there are men's stores that are run by families within each one of these particular groups that will supply the uniform for their group. Okay, so Lithuanian women do not, I don't think, wear wigs. They cover their hair, but they don't wear wigs. Hasidim, I think, Hasidic women do wear wigs. Okay, so there's that as well. And then, what's the style of dress? Are they dressed to fashion or not to fashion, the women, as long as they are modest? So, okay, so the Lithuanian Haredi go back to the Vilna Gaon. So the Gaon of Vilna was a major Jewish scholar, obviously from Vilna in Lithuania, from the 1700s. So the Lithuanian Haredi trace themselves back to the Vilna Gaon. If you Google Vilna Gaon, you will find a tremendous amount of material about him and about his scholarship and what he was known for. So the Lithuanians are also known for, the Lithuanian Haredi are known for their two things, for their constant dispute with Hasidim and also constant fight against enlightenment and modernization and assimilation. So just a little bit of things, a couple of things about history. Again, even though I was a history major in college, I'm not a historian, but enough that for us to help us understand what the context is for where these Lithuanian Haredi come from. Okay, so 1700s, 1800s, we have the rise of the Baal Shem Tov and the rise of the Hasidic movement. Okay, the Hasidic movement and the Lithuanian Haredi are both fighting against modernization of the Jewish community. Because in late 1700s, early 1800s, the ghetto wall has come down. Before that time, Jews were forced to live in a ghetto. And by living in the ghetto, Jewish life was mainstream, was only one way to be Jewish. And as a Jew, you have no choice but to live in the ghetto. You might have a job outside of the ghetto, but you always had to come back to live in the ghetto. That was the rule until the French Revolution came along and spread across Europe and broke down these barriers for the Jewish community. So once the Jewish community, I am oversimplifying, and I know that, okay? There are books and books and books that have been written about every detail about what I'm saying. But once the ghetto wall broke down and Jews no longer needed to live in the ghetto, the Jewish community leadership faced a major crisis. How do you keep the Jewish community organized? Can we keep the community organized? What are the values that we say are important for Jews to maintain no matter where they live and no matter what they do? Is it okay for Jews to respond to enlightenment and dress the way I'm dressed? Or do we force Jews to maintain a particular identity, an identifying outfit, and a particular approach to modernity? So all the denominations of Judaism started as a reaction to the ghetto wall being broken down. Okay? Reform Judaism was the first. It was only Judaism before. There were no names until the walls broke down. Reform Judaism came first. Orthodox Judaism came second. Conservative Judaism came third. And then 100 years later, Reconstructionist Judaism came. Okay? So Reform first, Orthodox second, Conservative third, all in response to modernity. Lithuanian Haredi are an extreme fundamentalist reaction to modernity, saying this is a crisis that would threaten the future of Judaism, modernity is. And we need to block modernity from our homes, from our community, from our lives. So today, what that means is, and Rabbi Kanievsky, among his rulings, if you look at the obituary that's in the Times of Israel, one of the rulings he said was that, just one second, in 2012, 10 years ago, Rabbi Kanievsky ruled that it was prohibited to own or use a smartphone without specific permission from a rabbinic authority, and that those who already had them could not sell them, but must destroy them instead, right? So you cannot benefit monetarily from having an iPhone. Once he said they're forbidden, in other words, you can't sell them, because even the monetary profit that you gain, or any money that you gain from selling the iPhone, is forbidden, right? So that it's forbidden and the profit gained from it is forbidden, right? So two levels of prohibition, right? So, for example, it's forbidden to eat pork, but it's not necessarily forbidden to sell pig leather or to make things out of pig and gain a livelihood from that. Okay, so what he's saying is iPhones are forbidden, profit from iPhone is forbidden. everything about an iPhone or other smartphones, not just iPhones, but Android phones too, are forbidden. Why? Because of access to the internet. And in part of me would be gung-ho in approval of Rabbi Kanievsky, okay? For just how the iPhone, how smartphones can take over our lives, can take over our heads, and totally mess up everything about what a true focus of values-driven life would be. So Kanievsky says, it's just one example of how outside culture is a threat to Jewish life, to a Torah Jewish life, to a life of purity and sanctity. That's what Lithuanian Haredi are trying to pursue. Hasidim are trying to pursue that too, but Lithuanian Haredi are trying to pursue a life in which there is no distraction from a pursuit of Jewish values. So the ideal Lithuanian Jew is in yeshiva studying. So the ideal Lithuanian Jewish man is in a yeshiva studying from early morning until late at night. And once he goes home, and on Shabbat, he is with his family, he is with his wife, and as a result, have as many children as possible. And the wife is the one who's going to be supporting the family. She's allowed to learn, she's allowed to study, but only until she gets married, and then she has to support the family. Okay, so that's Lithuanian Haredi lifestyle. Man is in yeshiva studying in a kollel, it's called. A lot of these kollels are supported through fundraising efforts, and in Israel, they're supported by the government of Israel as well. Taxpayer dollars go to support kollels all across Israel, and supplemented as well by the women getting a job. Now there are Lithuanian Haredi who are not studying all day and who do have jobs. But I'm saying the ideal Lithuanian man is studying all day. Kanievsky studied all day and received visitors who would be asking halachic questions, who would be asking for a blessing. And it's fascinating. The article pointed out, the obituary pointed out, he was a man of few words. Can you assume they oppose army service? That's a major debate in Israeli society today, and a major platform for certain of the political parties. Even the one political party that's Yisrael Beitenu, Avigdor Lieberman, who represents all the Russian Jews in Israel, major platform is that everybody has to serve in the army. All Jews have to serve in the army, no matter how black coat they are, or no matter how secular they are, everybody has to serve in the army. So they are trying to institute the draft within the Haredi community to moderate success. Okay, so once especially if the ultra-Orthodox are in the government, you have to tread very lightly on doing anything that would threaten the financial survival of the ultra-Orthodox community. Now that they are not in the government, you would think that the government would have the votes to be able to institute some of these laws, like instituting the draft, or having the egalitarian kotel be built up. The government has refused to go forward on these things, afraid of any pushback, and how the government could fall with a revolution from the opposition party and from other people, the regular population in Israel. So they've been treading very lightly here. So the not sure that the Haredi would be certainly not in favor of serving in the army, because you'd come across as a Haredi person, you'd be you'd meet non-Haredi people, and then you would be threatened. Your lifestyle could be threatened. So there are separate Haredi army units in the Israeli army that allow for Haredim to stand to keep to themselves. So that's the ideal for the Haredi, is to live within their very close-knit community without any influence from outside sources. They have their newspaper. The Yated Ne'eman is the main newspaper for the Haredi community, giving news that is filtered, that is appropriate for Haredim to read. And the Yated Ne'eman, the Yated is a tent peg, a tent peg that holds the tent. So the loyal, firm tent peg, that's the name of the newspaper. Okay, so that everything you read in that paper will give you strength, will give you moral and religious support to continue in your lifestyle. So you have a very close-knit community that takes care of each other, that supports one another, and ensures that everybody stays together, davens together. Any questions that come up, you ask the Rabbi, and the Rabbi will guide you along your path. Okay.
Are they Zionist, or does it vary with the group?
They are Zionist. They are the Neturei Karta are not Zionist. So the Lithuanian Haredim do pay taxes to Israel. Some of the other Hasidim don't, but Lithuania Haredim, I'm almost positive they do pay taxes. Okay, so that's also another segment of this dispute in Israeli society about why do we, non-ultra-Orthodox, have to have our lives impacted by the ultra-Orthodox. And what we mean by that is, to get married in Israel, you have to get married by the chief rabbinate, okay? If they don't work, how do they pay taxes? That's a good question, Robert. I don't know the ins and outs of how the kollel, right? So the thing is, for the Hasidic communities where they don't pay taxes, the very troubling piece is that their yeshivas still receive money from the Israeli government. So the Israeli government will support them, but the people themselves are not paying taxes. So they're not even supporting their own community through taxes. Okay, so this adds to, I'm just scratching the surface here of the major challenges that the ultra-Orthodox pose to the rest of Israeli society. All right, and so there's a lot of challenges in Israeli society today. How to deal with the Israeli Arab population, how to fully integrate Israeli Arabs into Israeli society fully, how to decrease racism and bigotry in Israeli society of Israelis, of Arabs, how to social justice in Israel as well, and the Haredi community. These are just some of the many issues that Israel has to deal with, and they keep pushing it aside because the main issues is Israel's survival. Dealing with, thank God it's been quiet recently, but dealing with Palestinian terrorism and dealing with Iran. Some things we read about, like if you read Times of Israel every day, Israel destroyed last month basically all of Iran's drone air force, right? So it's what Israel has to do in order to maintain superiority and leverage and survival in a very unfriendly region. Okay, so all of that, because of that, that's been priority number one in Israel. So it's the majority of Israel's budget goes to defense in order to survive. And 90% of Israel agrees with that. Even the most liberal in Israel understand we need to survive, okay? And sometimes it's a luxury to think about, oh, let's now deal with social justice issues, okay? So to get married in Israel you have to go to the chief rabbinate, which means an Orthodox rabbi. And if you're not Orthodox, it's ridiculous to have to be forced to do that. You can't take public transportation on Shabbat except in the city of Haifa. And the city of Haifa was grandfathered in because before 1948, public transportation ran in Haifa, so they keep it running in Haifa today. So in Haifa today, if you're a secular Jew, you can take a bus to travel around Haifa. But anywhere else in Israel, public transportation at a halt. If you're an Arab, there's separate Arab transportation services that are available, and there are taxi cabs that you can take if you need to get somewhere. So, or you obviously you can drive your own car, but it's expensive to own a car and to drive a car in Israel. Anyway, so it's hard. If you're a poor Jew in Israel and you need to work every single day, even on Shabbat, you can't take public transportation on Shabbat to get to your job. Okay. So that's just two of the things that of the impact that Haredim have on Israeli society. 10%, 12% of the community has an incredible impact on the rest of Israeli society. Yes, Lori.
Yeah, how would anyone, if there's separate transportation services for Arabs, how do they check if you're an Arab or a Jew?
No, anybody can get on it. Anybody
Uh-huh.
can go. So you see this in places where there are significant Arab populations, there would be an Arab bus service that you would see go by. So, for example, when I've been in Israel, most of my time I spend in Jerusalem. Jerusalem has a significant Arab population. So you see the Arab bus, and you know they're Arab buses because you see Arabic on the front of the bus. And the number of the line, what bus line it is Arabic numbers, which they have in the Arabic language. They have a different number system than we do, right? They don't have numbers that look like our numbers. So you could just see it go by. And also there are Arab taxi cab companies, different from Israeli taxi cab companies. Now, does an Israeli Jew use the Arab bus? I don't know. I think that that could be related to bigotry and racism, feeling that maybe it's not so safe to ride. Now, there is one system. The light rail in Jerusalem is known to be like the melting pot of Jerusalem society, where all segments of Jerusalem society ride the light rail. So Arabs, Palestinians, Haredi, secular are all riding the light rail, which is pretty cool. And everybody feels safe doing that, but it doesn't run on Shabbat. So, okay. So Rabbi, back to finishing up here with the Ultra-Orthodox. So their raison d'etre is to respond to, in a fundamentalist way, to the threats of modernity. And their raison d'etre is to have a very, very fundamentalist approach to Jewish law and to God. Okay, so that that double-pronged approach is that, first and foremost, their approach to Judaism will protect them, secondly, from any ravages of the outside world. The more you're studying in the yeshiva all day, and I'm rocking back and forth because this is the yeshiva style, the shuckling. The more you shuckle in prayer and study, the more hours of day that you're devoted to it, the more that you have a family that supports you and agrees with you, and you're in a community that lives the same way, the more you will be protected from anything that could go wrong, and that you will be blessed with a long life. That is in very simple terms what it means to be an ultra-Orthodox Lithuanian Haredi person. Okay, so that for some, it could be such an easier lifestyle. Everything is black and white. There are no choices that you have to worry about. There is no nuance in life. You just do what the Rabbi says, do what the Talmud and the Shulchan Aruch tell you to do. Just study and be a good Jew according to the definition of Lithuanian Haredi. Life is simple. Okay, and I can see the attraction in some ways to having that kind of lifestyle. It's just easier to know everything is taken care of. All the major decisions in life are just taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about finding someone to marry. The Rebbe will find that person for you. Don't worry. You go on 1 or 2 dates in public, right? If you've seen Shtisel, the Israel, so you see what dates are like. You go to a lobby of a hotel, you sit at a table in the lobby, have a coffee or a soda, and you talk to this other person, and what are you gonna talk about? You're not gonna talk about books you've read, because it's just not what's done. You're not gonna talk about a movie you've seen. You're not gonna talk about the museum you went to. What you can imagine, the level of conversation is, oh, what did you study today? What did you learn from the Daf Yomi today? That kind of thing. And so it's it's a personality test more than anything else about, what's your dream for the future family. I mean, everybody has the same dream. So it's just, that's why that Akiva in the Shtisel had such a problem with that, because he just didn't fit into that Haredi world. But so everything, you don't have to worry about finding a woman to marry, finding a man to marry. You don't have to worry about, oh, should I be having children? When should I be having children? You just live your life. So yeah, it can be attractive, but I don't know. As a non-ultra-Orthodox person, I could not imagine living like that, and how overbearing it would seem to me, and that everybody and constant glare of everybody else watching what everybody else is doing to make sure everybody's staying in line and doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's too much for me. But Rabbi Kanievsky, who apparently studied the entire Talmud every single year, right? The Daf Yomi cycle goes through the entire Talmud in 7.5 years. That's studying 1 page a day. Kanievsky studied the whole Talmud every year, and besides writing articles and teaching. Now, of his rulings, we should say this: 2 things. One is that he, when COVID first began 2 years ago, when it first started, he was opposed to closing the Haredi school system. He was opposed to it. So in March of 2020, when COVID was just starting, he was opposed to it. But once it was rampant, then he agreed Haredi schools should close. And he was pro-vaccine. He was pro-vaccine, even for 5 to 11-year-olds. So he was pro-vaccine. He also was pro-marijuana. Of all the things that Times of Israel would report on, he said he was, as long as the state authorities permitted it, it's medical cannabis, perfectly acceptable. He said medical cannabis, so not like recreational, but medical cannabis. And then he also ruled, and this is important because there's a rising tide of sex abuse being reported, especially child sex abuse reported in the Haredi community. So in 2017, he ruled that reporting child sex abuse to police without the need to first consult with rabbinic authority is logical because it is saving another person. So in other words, in the Haredi community, if something were to be reported, you'd go to the rabbi first before going to the authorities. And then the rabbi would most likely sweep it under the rug. He said, Kanievsky, to his credit, said, no, you should report it to the police right away. So that, give him credit for that to understand that child sex abuse within Haredi community is a scourge to try to rectify. Okay, so that's essentially what I wanted to share about Lithuanian Ultra-Orthodox. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes, Robert.
You talked about the Lithuanian Haredi.
Yeah.
And I think we're all familiar with how many Chabad houses are around.
Yes.
So they're clearly not in that separatist.
No, they are. The Chabad are. So here's the thing. First of all, Chabad, Lubavitch, they're Hasidic. Okay, so there's a difference between ultra-Orthodox Hasidic and ultra-Orthodox non-Hasidic.
Okay.
So among all of the ultra-Orthodox, Hasidic and non-Hasidic, it's all about living in your bubble, okay, and trying to maintain the least amount of contact as possible. The only difference is Lubavitch, who has their distinct definitions to reach out to other Jews to bring them in. Other ultra-Orthodox are not interested in that. They don't want to have any kind of contact with anybody who's not like them because of the threat that it may pose to their own community and the uniformity of their community. Lubavitch is not so worried about that. Now, the most Lubavitch, so there's Chabad here in Olney, right? Members of our synagogue participate in Chabad activities there. But Chabad, so they're open to anybody coming in, and they don't charge for most of the things that they do, so that makes it attractive. And the community that they have, that they're fostering, seems to be welcoming and non-judgmental. But when they do have services, women are sitting behind a partition, and only if you are fully observant of Jewish law can you fully participate in the service. And their children, their own children, are going to Lubavitch schools. They're not going to public school or any other schools around here. Some of them go to schools in Baltimore, or if they're out of America, like I remember going to Chabad in Peru one Friday night, and sometimes the rabbi is by himself a couple months a year while his wife and kids are back in Israel in school there, right? So he's by himself during a high tourist season in Peru. So these Lubavitch, they're willing to make that compromise to reach out to bring their brand of Judaism to the rest of the Jewish world. But other Hasidim and other non-Hasidic ultra-Orthodox are not interested in that at all. Okay, so the difference between Hasidic and non-Hasidic ultra-Orthodox is it's in their approach to davening. That's at least how it started. So the Baal Shem Tov was into singing and dancing during services and taking their time with services to get into the tune and to build kind of an ecstasy in the service itself. And the Lithuanian non-Hasidic were not interested in that. They thought that was a waste of time. Just do the davening, do it like it's supposed to do, and then go to study. The classic story that highlights the difference between Hasidic and non-Hasidic is the great Yiddish story by I.L. Peretz called "If Not Higher." So I've read that story in a number of contexts. I think we've studied it over the years. Just Google it. "If Not Higher" by I.L. Peretz. So it's how it's written from the Hasidic perspective and how a Lithuanian non-Hasid gets converted over to this particular Hasidic Rebbe. But it's just fascinating how that happens, and so it's a different approach to Jewish lifestyle. So, but from an outsider, as a non-Orthodox person looking at the entire community, they all look the same, and their approach is the same. You want to have a very, very fundamentalist approach to living a Jewish lifestyle. There are just some nuances that are different within the world itself, that only if you're in the world can you know the differences between them. And you would say, let's say as a Baba or Chassid, I would never walk into that Gera Chassid's home, even though to an outsider they look exactly the same. Okay, so that's the only difference with Lubavitch, how they're willing to be in the outside world, but everybody else in the Hasidic and the non-Hasidic Haredi world have no interest in that. And when you walk through Mea Shearim, signs in huge print. If you're going to walk on our streets, you better be dressed modestly, because if not, better to expect some insults and yelling at you.
Yeah. Rabbi,
Yes,
you happen to mention about the difference between eating pork and using pig skins and stuff like that.
Yes.
How do they feel about getting like a pig valve in their heart where it's inside their body?
Oh, yeah. So I would think most people, even ultra-Orthodox, would accept that and understand, because they know in the sources themselves that they study all the time, it's clear. If it's going to save your life, you can eat bacon. Let's say a doctor says, in order for you to live, you need to eat bacon. Then you have to follow the doctor's orders. So in order to save a life, saving a life outweighs laws of kashrut. And having a pig valve in your heart or other kind of non-kosher animal products in your body is totally fine in order to save your life. First of all, you're not eating it, so it didn't get into your heart because you ate it. It's being put there. So it's a non-issue. It really is. It sounds funny to us to have cow valves or pig valves or any other kind of calcium pills that people are prescribed. A lot of calcium pills are made from oyster shells. Okay, so you're eating trafe if you're taking calcium pills. So if you wanted to, you could find kosher calcium pills, but it's not necessary, because if you're taking calcium because a doctor prescribes it, it's okay. Just take calcium pills. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Also, now that Pesach is coming, a lot of medication has chametz in it. But you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about having kosher for Passover medication, because if a doctor prescribes it, it's okay. It's okay. So these are really, I mean, they're interesting to talk about. Ooh, wow, he has a pig valve in him. He's not kosher. It's not, it's really a non-issue. It's really a non-issue. And my father is going to be getting one of those, well, not a full-blown valve like that. It's a new-ish kind of procedure through a catheter through his artery to install the valve that way. So and there's pig tissue in that as well. So not an issue. Any other questions or comments about the Lithuanian Hasidim, Haredim? All right, folks.
Could
Yeah.
you repeat that book, if not, and I didn't
It's
get
a story. It's a story called If Not Higher. If Not Higher, Higher.
H-I-G,
Gher. Like,
Oh,
how
it's not
high
high.
did the
Oh.
Rebbe go? To
Okay.
heaven? Oh, he went to heaven, if not higher. Okay, that's the name of the story. I.L. Peretz, and it should be available because it's more than 100 years old. So it should come up and you should be able to read it for free in whatever format you want. It's a short story. It's very good. Okay, next Monday, we're not meeting because I have to take my father to the hospital for a test, which is preliminary before he has that pig valve replacement. So that I'll be in the hospital with my father next Monday morning. So no class next week, but we'll meet again in 2 weeks. Okay.
Just a quick question.
That's right.
Does Shari Tefillah ever, I know with COVID, it's not in the cards probably, but does Shari Tefillah ever do trips to Israel? For the
We
congregation?
were planning on a trip to Israel before COVID hit. And I have been thinking about it again, about when to schedule another one. I have to sit with my personal calendar and with the shul calendar. So tentatively, I'm thinking of 2023 to do a trip to Israel, but we also need to have enough people for a trip. We would need like 15 or 20 people in order to make it work. So yes, it is. I'm thinking about it, but I'm not ready yet to advertise anything yet.
Mhm.
All right. Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Bye.